Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. My wife watched her mother slap me 5 times outside our church, then smiled like I was the one embarrassing her and whispered, "Stop being dramatic. Man up." Here's how it happened. I'm Darian Ellery, 34, logistics supervisor for a regional distribution network that feeds half the Midwest. My job is simple to explain and hard to do. I make sure the right things arrive at the right places at the right time, even when trucks break down, weather shuts roads, and people lie about what they promised. I've always been calm, not because I'm numb, but because panic makes mistakes. I start every day the same: black coffee, oatmeal, weather check, then a quiet playlist while I scan routes like they're chessboards. My wife, Karis Whitlow, was the opposite of my quiet. She had the kind of charm that made strangers offer help without being asked. She ran a sleek wellness brand, body oils, candles, scrubs, packaged in clean bottles with minimalist labels. Karis could sell you a feeling. She could make a room feel like it was leaning toward her. In public, she spoke softly, laughed at the right moments, and squeezed my arm like we were a team. In private, she measured me like I was a resource, useful when convenient, irritating when not. When we first met, it was easy. We were in Baltimore, late summer, humid enough that your shirt clings even at night. She had a pop-up table in an outdoor market near the harbor, and I was there with a coworker who promised good food and good music. Karis handed me a sample of some citrus-scented oil and said, "You look like someone who forgets to take care of himself." It wasn't flirty. It was observant. I like that. I like that she noticed me without performing for me. Our early months were full of small, real joys. She'd drag me onto the bus just to sit by the window and people watch. We'd stop at a corner store for ginger ale and chips, then end up at a diner with cracked red vinyl seats where the waitress called everyone Han. Karis loved routines too, just different ones. Sunday morning facials, late-night online browsing for packaging ideas, voice memos to herself like she was always coaching her future. When she laughed, her whole face softened, like she forgot to be guarded. The first time she brought me around her mother, Marceline Whitlow, I tried to read the room the way I read a loading dock. Marceline was polished, tall, and always dressed like she was on her way somewhere important. She had a habit of clearing her throat before speaking, like she expected the world to settle down and listen. She hugged Karis, ignored my outstretched hand, and said, "So you're the one. Not nice to meet you. Not welcome." Just that, like I was a product with a questionable review. Karis squeezed my hand under the table and smiled at her mother the way people smile at a judge. "Mom, Darian is in logistics," she said like she was presenting my credentials. Marceline's eyes flicked over my shirt collar, my shoes, my posture. "Logistics," she repeated slowly. "So, warehouses." Then she leaned back and took a sip of water like she'd proven something. That moment was small, but left a thin scratch. I told myself it was normal family skepticism. I told myself I'd earn respect through consistency. The disrespect didn't arrive all at once. It escalated the way water rises, quiet until it's suddenly at your throat. It started with jokes that weren't jokes. At a dinner in Washington, D.C., when Karis's friends asked what I did, I said, "Operations and logistics." Karis laughed lightly and added, "He moves boxes and acts like it's the Pentagon." Everyone chuckled. I chuckled too, because I didn't want to be the man who turns one comment into a fight. But on the drive home, I said, "Don't talk about my work like that." Karis kept her eyes on the road and said, "You're too sensitive, Darian. It's just honesty." That phrase, just honesty, became her permission slip. If she criticized me publicly, it was honesty. If she dismissed me privately, it was honesty. If I reacted, I was insecure. If I didn't react, I was weak. It was an argument designed to leave me nowhere safe. I still loved her then, so I kept trying to find the right tone, the right moment, the right approach. The truth is, I was already negotiating my dignity. Marceline made herself a regular presence in our marriage without ever asking. She'd call Karis during dinner on speaker, then talk like I wasn't sitting there. "Did he pay the mortgage on time?" she'd ask. "Is he saving properly?" Because a man who works around boxes isn't exactly future-proof. Karis would glance at me like she was checking whether I'd behave, then say, "Mom, we're fine." But she never said, "Don't speak about my husband like that." She never corrected the contempt. She let it hang in the air and hoped I'd swallow it. By the time we moved into a townhouse outside Columbus, the line between Karis's business and our life blurred into something unhealthy. Her packaging arrived at our door. Her customer returns came to our mailbox. Her brand meetings happened at our kitchen island. I didn't mind helping at first. I built her a simple spreadsheet for inventory. I created a shipping routine that made her deliveries faster. I taught her how to reduce errors. Label, scan, verify, ship. She called me her secret weapon in public. In private, she called my work basic whenever she was angry. One winter night, snow tapping the windows, I was seasoning chicken for meal prep when Karis walked in, picked up my phone, and started scrolling like she owned it. Not playful, not curious, possessive. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Checking," she said. "Men get comfortable and start embarrassing you." I held my hand still over the counter, spices on my fingers. "Give me my phone," I said calmly. She smirked. "If you have nothing to hide, why are you tense?" That was her favorite trick. Accuse, then punish my reaction. A week later, she did it again, this time in front of her cousin at our place. I was in the living room folding laundry when she snatched my phone and said, "Let me see who you're texting." Her cousin laughed awkwardly like it was cute. I stared at Karis and said, "That's not okay." She handed the phone back with an exaggerated sigh. "God, Darian, you act like I'm asking for a kidney." Then she looked at her cousin and added, "He's so dramatic. He forgets I'm the prize." My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed level. "Don't talk about me like I'm property." Marceline rewarded that behavior. She'd call Karis afterward and say, "Good. Keep him in check. A soft man will embarrass you the first chance he gets." Sometimes Marceline would visit and inspect our home like a landlord. She'd run her finger along a shelf, then raise her eyebrow. "You cook like this every week?" she'd ask me, seeing my meal prep containers lined up. "That's cute. But cute doesn't pay for a woman's standards." She'd say it with a smile, so she could claim she was joking. Karis would giggle and say, "Mom, stop." But she never stopped. I have my own flaws, so let me be honest. I avoided confrontation because I confused calm with silence. I told myself I was being mature, but a lot of my quiet was pride. I didn't want to admit I'd married someone who could look at me with contempt. I didn't want to be the man calling friends to say, "My wife and her mother are disrespecting me." I thought if I stayed steady, if I worked harder, if I loved her better, she'd eventually choose me over her mother's voice. I was wrong. The first time Karis threatened to leave, it was over something small. She asked me to buy a new SUV for the brand image. I said we should plan it, look at cash flow, and make sure her business revenue was consistent. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. "You always want to slow me down," she said. "That's why you're still stuck in warehouses." I kept my tone even. "I'm not stuck. I'm stable." She snapped. Stable is another word for boring. Then she leaned in and said, quiet but sharp, "If you can't keep up, I'll find someone who can." After that, threats became a regular tool. If I questioned her spending, she'd say, "I can replace you." If I asked for basic respect, she'd say, "Do you want me to leave?" If I expressed hurt, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Man up." She used that phrase the way people use a door: shut it and move on. Meanwhile, Marceline fed her lines like a scriptwriter. "Don't apologize," Marceline told her once, right in front of me at a family cookout in a Cleveland neighborhood park. "If you apologize, he'll think he has power." The cookout was one of the most revealing days of our marriage. Sunlight, kids running, music floating from speaker. I stood by the grill flipping chicken while Karis posed for photos near the picnic tables, smiling like she was in an ad. Marceline walked up behind me and said, "You grilling? That's good. Men should at least be useful." I didn't respond. She continued anyway. "My daughter needs a man with presence, not logistics." She said my job was like it was a medical condition. I turned and looked at her calmly. "I'm her husband," I said. "Speak to me with respect." Marceline laughed like I told a joke. "Respect is earned," she said, "not requested." Then she raised her voice toward the tables. Karis, your husband is being emotional. Everyone's heads turned. Karis glanced over, smiled tightly, and said, loud enough for people to hear, Darian, stop. You're too sensitive. I felt heat rush up my neck, but I kept my hand steady on the tongs. That's the thing about humiliation. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's being made small in front of people who pretend they didn't see. That night, back home, I told Karis quietly, your mother embarrassed me on purpose. Karis took off her earrings and said, you made it a thing. If you didn't react, it wouldn't be a thing. I stared at her for a long moment. You're saying I should accept disrespect to keep peace? Karis shrugged. I'm saying you should be a man. Then she walked upstairs and closed the bedroom door like the conversation was trash she'd already taken out. I sat at the kitchen table alone, listening to the fridge hum, feeling my own silence turning into something heavier. Around that time, I started a new ritual. Not revenge. Clarity. I bought a small notebook and began recording incidents the way I record shipment exceptions. Daytime, what happened, who witnessed. Marceline insulted my job. Cookout. Karis checked my phone. No reason. Threatened to leave. SUV argument. At first, I felt ridiculous, like I was being petty. Then I realized it was the opposite. Writing it down prevented me from rewriting reality to protect my feelings. It stopped me from saying, maybe I imagined it. No, it happened. Here are the facts. The more I documented, the more patterns appeared. Karis's respect for me depended on what I provided, not who I was. When I solved a problem for her business, like tracking down a lost shipment, she was sweet. When I needed emotional support, she treated me like an inconvenience. Marceline's disrespect escalated whenever Karis allowed it. And Karis allowed it because it kept power where she wanted it. With her, I realized I'd been trying to earn respect from people who benefited from withholding it. That's a losing game. One spring afternoon, Marceline came over unannounced while I was working from home. I'd taken a day to handle route planning because a storm had messed up deliveries across 2 states. My laptop was open, maps and spreadsheets on the screen. Marceline walked in, looked at my setup, and said, playing office? I didn't take the bait. I said, I'm working. She smiled and walked into the kitchen, then said loudly, Karis, is this what you want? A man who pretends to be busy. Karis laughed from the hallway and said, Mom, stop. But her voice carried amusement, not correction. Marceline's favorite family trigger was comparison. She'd bring up Karis's ex, an old boyfriend who drove a flashy car and posted pictures in designer clothes. At least he looked like a husband, Marceline would say. Or she'd bring up her sister's husband, a man in finance, and say, he understands providing. She never said those things when Karis wasn't around. She made sure her daughter heard, because the point wasn't to hurt me. It was to shape Karis's view of me. And Karis, instead of defending me, soaked it in. I watched my own wife learn contempt like a language. Then came the church group chat. Karis joined a women's ministry circle that included Marceline and a few older women. They weren't cruel in public. They were polite, prayerful, and smiling. But in that group chat, Marceline's comments leaked into our home like a bad smell. Karis would read something and suddenly treat me differently. One night she said, my mom thinks you're too passive. I looked up from my plate. Your mom doesn't live in our marriage, I said. Karis replied, she knows what men are. You don't. That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. The first time Marceline physically touched me, it was small but deliberate. We were in the kitchen, and she tapped my cheek with 2 fingers like you tap a child. Wake up, she said, smiling. I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said calmly. She lifted her eyebrows like I'd threatened her. Oh, he has rules now, she said, turning to Karis. See, this is what I mean. He's fragile. Karis laughed lightly, then told me, relax. I remember thinking, if she'll let her mother touch me like that, what else will she allow? After that, Marceline got bolder. At a family dinner, she corrected me mid-sentence with a raised hand, like she was stopping traffic. No, she said, that's not how life works. Another time, she snapped her fingers at me for a drink refill, twice, then said, thank you, like she trained me. The cruelest part wasn't Marceline's behavior. It was Karis's face when it happened, amused, indulgent, like she was watching a performance. I catch her glancing at other people to see if they noticed. Like my humiliation was proof she had control. I tried counseling. I suggested it gently, without blame. We need a neutral space, I said. We're stuck. Karis laughed. Counseling is for people who can't handle real life, she said. You always need someone to validate your feelings. I kept my voice steady. I'm not asking for validation. I'm asking for respect. She rolled her eyes. Respect is earned, she said. Marceline's line, word for word. That's when I understood something cold. My wife wasn't just influenced by her mother. She was repeating it. She was becoming her. Around that time, I stopped reacting the way Karis expected. When she accused me without proof, I didn't argue. I asked for specifics. When she called my job small, I didn't defend it. I stated what it was and moved on. When she threatened to leave, I didn't beg. I said, do what you feel you must. This confused her. She preferred me hurt because hurt meant control. My calm made her escalate. She needed a bigger button. Marceline provided it. Hit him where it counts. Marceline told her once at our place. Men like him only understand embarrassment. The Sunday of the slaps was cold and overcast in South Philly. We were visiting Karis's extended family because Marceline insisted we show unity. The service was ordinary. Hymns, announcements, a sermon about pride and humility that made me want to laugh at the timing. Afterward, people spilled out onto the steps, greeting each other, talking about food, kids, plans. Karis was in her element, smiling, hugging, being the perfect image. Marceline stood close to her like a shadow with perfume. I tried to keep my distance. Marceline waited until we were near the steps, with enough people around to witness, but not enough to intervene quickly. She leaned toward me and said, "You think you're the man in this marriage?" I kept my face still. "This isn't the place," I said. She smiled like she'd heard a dare. "You don't decide places," she said. I turned slightly toward Karis and said calmly, "Karis, tell your mother to stop." Karis glanced at Marceline, then at the people watching, then back at me, and said softly, "Darian, please don't start." That was the match. Marceline slapped me once, sharp, loud. I blinked, more surprised than hurt. Karis's eyes widened, but she didn't move. Marceline slapped me again. The second one made the crowd go silent in that thick waist silence gets when people don't want to be involved. The third slap came with a ring scraping skin, just enough sting to remind me it was real. The fourth was slower, theatrical. The fifth felt like punctuation. I tasted blood where my cheek met my teeth. I looked at Karis, waiting for her to step in. Karis made a face like she was tired. Not horrified, not protective. Tired. "Oh my God," she whispered, then leaned close to me and said, "Stop being dramatic. Man up." Marceline adjusted her scarf and said loudly, "See? Too soft." Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to check their phone. I stood there for a second, feeling something inside me go quiet and clear. Not rage, not sadness. A switch. The kind that flips when you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding. I nodded once and said, "Okay." Then I walked away. Karis followed me to the car, furious, not at her mother, but at me for refusing to absorb it. "Why are you acting like this?" she hissed, opening the passenger door. "People are looking." I stared at the steering wheel a second, letting my breathing slow. "They should look," I said. Karis scoffed. "You're going to embarrass me over my mother?" she demanded. "After everything I do?" I turned my head and asked quietly, "What do you do, Karis?" She blinked like she'd never been asked that question. Then she used her weapon. "I will leave you and do better," she said. I nodded again. "Okay," I repeated. Karis stared at me like she expected me to change shape, cry, plead, bargain. When I didn't, she slammed the door and stormed back toward the church steps, where Marceline was already acting like a victim. I drove to our hotel in silence. That night, while Karis slept with her phone face down on the nightstand, I sat at the small desk and opened my notebook. I didn't write about feelings. I wrote facts. 5 slaps. Witnesses. Karis's response. Then I opened my laptop and started planning like I plan routes. Legal, clean, efficient. Here is what people misunderstand about selling everything. They picture anger, drama, revenge. Mine looked like paperwork. My calm didn't mean I wasn't hurt. It meant I wasn't going to be sloppy. The house we owned back in Ohio was in my name and hers, but the structure, the down payment, the payments, the documentation, was organized because I'd insisted on clarity from day one. Karis always teased me for being obsessive. You treat our life like a spreadsheet, she'd say. She never realized spreadsheets protect you when emotions turn into weapons. Over the next 2 weeks, I didn't confront. I observed. I listened. I watched Karis and Marceline rewrite the church incident into a story where I was disrespectful. Marceline reacted, and Karis was caught in the middle. I heard Karis on the phone say, "He's acting like a victim." I heard Marceline say, "He needed that." And I felt my last remaining denial dissolve. I contacted a mediator. I consulted an attorney. I didn't ask, "How do I ruin them?" I asked, "How do I exit cleanly?" Clean exits are the coldest when the other person expects chaos. I separated finances quietly. New direct deposit. New personal account. I removed myself from any shared autopay that was for her business. I kept paying what I was obligated to pay for the household during the separation period, because I'm not reckless. But I stopped being the invisible support beam, and I stopped solving her problems. When a shipment of her packaging got delayed, and she tried to hand me the tracking number like it was my job, I handed it back and said, "You can call the carrier." She stared. "You're being petty," she snapped. I replied, calm, "I'm being accurate." Karis didn't feel it immediately. She was still posting cheerful content, still calling herself blessed, still letting Marceline come over and speak about me like I was a failed investment. But my absence began to show in small failures that stacked. Her business used our home address for vendor accounts, returns, and wholesale agreements. Once I started mail forwarding and the house moved toward listing, deliveries bounced. Return windows were missed. A vendor emailed her, "We attempted delivery twice. If your receiving address isn't stable, we will pause your account." Karis read that email at the kitchen island and said, "This is your fault." I didn't even look up. "No," I said. "It's logistics." Then shipping costs changed. Karis didn't know the discounted rates she'd been enjoying weren't magic. They were tied to arrangements I could access through my work history and my relationships with carriers. Not illegal, not shady, just connections and negotiated rates you get after years of being dependable. Karis thought she was manifesting. She didn't realize I was optimizing. When I stopped funneling her packages through the efficient options I'd set up, her costs rose. $1 more per shipment doesn't sound like much until you ship hundreds. Her margins shrank. Her sellouts started looking like break-even. Karis reacted the way she always did, with charm first, then contempt. She called me, voice suddenly soft. "Babe, can you just help me for a second? It's only shipping." I asked, "Do you respect my work?" She paused. "Darian, don't do this right now." I said, calmly, "Answer the question." She exhaled sharply. "You're really going to punish me?" I replied, "I'm not punishing you. I'm stepping away." Her voice hardened. "My mom was right about you," she snapped. "You're cold." I looked out the window at a street that wasn't ours anymore and said, "You taught me." That's when the first real consequence hit, an email from her payment processor. Karis's customers started complaining about late deliveries. A few filed disputes. Disputes turned into chargebacks. Then the processor flagged her account and placed a reserve, meaning she could still make sales, but she couldn't access most of the money for weeks. She stood in the living room, phone in hand, reading the message aloud like it was a curse. "They're holding my funds," she whispered. Marceline, the speaker, barked, "Tell them your husband sabotaged you." Karis looked at me like I could fix it. I didn't move. "Call them," I said. "Tell them the truth. You're behind." Cash reserves are what keeps small businesses breathing. Without them, every decision becomes a panic decision. Karis started cutting corners. Cheaper packaging, slower shipping, fewer restocks. Her brand image began to slip. A supplier switched her to prepaid only. Another reduced her credit terms. Karis tried to borrow from a friend and got turned down. She applied for a nicer apartment once she realized the house would sell, and her application was denied because her income looked unstable under review and her funds were partially reserved. She told herself it was haters and bad luck. But it was simple. Businesses collapse when systems fail. I have been a system. Meanwhile, the house listing went live. Showings happened. Offers came in. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt. I followed the legal process and moved with clean hands. When Karis realized I was serious, she tried a different strategy. Tears. One night she came downstairs in a robe, eyes red, and said, "I didn't mean it. My mom shouldn't have done that." I watched her carefully. "Do you believe she was wrong?" I asked. Karis hesitated, then said, "You know how she is." That was the moment I knew nothing had changed. If the apology has a loophole, it isn't an apology. Marceline escalated when she felt control slipping. She started showing up uninvited more often, making loud statements for effect. "A real man wouldn't leave his wife like this," she said in our kitchen, looking directly at me like she was daring me to respond. I set my coffee mug down calmly and said, "A real mother wouldn't put hands on her son-in-law." Marceline's face tightened. "Watch your tone," she said. "Or what?" I asked, still quiet. She looked toward Karis, expecting backup. Karis didn't speak. She just stared at me like she didn't recognize the version of me that wasn't pleading. To drag the family into it, Marceline staged what she called an intervention. She invited an uncle, an aunt, 2 church friends, people who liked the idea of being wise. They sat in our living room like a panel. Marceline spoke first. "Darian is abandoning my daughter," she said, "because his pride got hurt." I listened without interrupting. When they finished, I said calm, "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm leaving a marriage where disrespect is encouraged." One aunt said, "But families fight." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "families fight. Families do not assault and then demand silence." Nobody had a good response to that. They shifted in their seats like the truth was uncomfortable furniture. After the meeting, Karis cornered me in the hallway and hissed, "Why are you making my mother look bad?" I stared at her. "She did that herself," I said. Karis's eyes flashed. "You think you're better than us?" she demanded. I answered honestly, "I think I'm worth basic dignity." She laughed bitterly. "You're acting like a victim." I replied, "No. I'm acting like a man who finally believes what he's seeing." That sentence hit her harder than any argument I'd ever made, because it removed the one thing she relied on, my doubt. My transfer to Indianapolis came through. Same company, higher scope, better pay. Logistics rewards people who stay calm under pressure. I didn't tell Karis until it was necessary. Not because I was hiding, because I wasn't negotiating. I packed my essentials, clothes, documents, the notebook, my laptop. I left the furniture that was more ours than mine because I wasn't trying to strip the house out of anger. I was leaving to save myself. The morning I drove away, the sky was bright and cold. I put on my playlist, gripped the steering wheel, and felt grief mixed with relief, like waking up from a long, expensive dream. The house was sold. The sale proceeds were handled according to the agreement. Karis expected me to soften once the paperwork was real. Instead, I became more peaceful. Peace is unsettling to people who confuse love with control. Karis started sending long messages, some apologetic, some accusatory, sometimes both in the same paragraph. "I miss you," she wrote. Then, "We didn't have to be so cold." Then, "My mom was just protecting me." I didn't respond, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because conversation had become her tool to rewrite reality. Silence was my boundary. The coldest consequence wasn't public humiliation. It was private doors closing. Karis tried to relaunch her brand with a big sale to recover cash. The sale went well on the surface, orders came in. But because the processor still held reserves, she couldn't access enough funds to fulfill everything smoothly. Late shipments led to more disputes. More disputes extended the reserve period. She was stuck in a loop. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she started delivering packages herself late at night, exhausted, frantic, no longer posting glossy videos. Her brand wasn't killed. It just shrank into something heavy, stressful, and unglamorous, like the work she'd mocked. Marceline didn't apologize. She doubled down. She told people I was weak and controlling. She said I used money to punish her daughter. But the funny thing about logistics is it teaches you what's measurable. People can call you names all day. They can't argue with timelines, invoices, and agreements. When mediation required documentation, income, expenses, shared obligations, Kara struggled. Not because she was evil, but because she'd been careless. She'd blurred business and personal spending. She made decisions based on confidence instead of accounting. When asked to prove stability, she couldn't. The mediator didn't judge her character. The mediator judged facts. Facts are colder than opinions. One afternoon, Karis called me with a voice I barely recognized, flat, tired, stripped of performance. I had to let go, she said. The business. I felt a flicker of sadness because I remembered the early version of her. Ambitious, laughing, hopeful. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "You were the only thing in my life that was consistent." I didn't reply with anger. I replied with honesty. Consistency isn't love if it's used like a leash, I said. Karis inhaled like she was trying not to cry. I didn't think you'd actually leave, she admitted. That's the problem, I said quietly. You built your confidence on the idea that I wouldn't protect myself. Karis's voice cracked. My mom, she started. I stopped her gently. This isn't about your mother, I said. She did what she does. It's about what you allowed. She went silent. In that silence, I could hear the collapse of a story she'd told herself. That I was too calm to ever walk away, too responsible to ever choose peace over partnership, too proud to ever admit I was being mistreated. She was learning, too late, that calm men still have limits. The last time I saw Marceline in person was at the mediator's office. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she came anyway, dressed like a woman who never expects consequences. She sat next to Karis as if she owned the chair. When she saw me, she smirked and said, "Look who decided to show up." I didn't react. The mediator asked Marceline to step out. Marceline tried to argue, then realized nobody cared about her authority in that room. As she stood, she leaned toward me and whispered, "You'll regret this." I looked at her calmly and said, "The only thing I regret is staying so long." After the session, Karis followed me into the hallway. She looked smaller without her audience. "So that's it?" she asked, voice trembling. "You really done?" I studied her face. I saw charm and pride and hurt all tangled together. "You let your mother put hands on me," I said quietly, "and then you call my dignity drama." Karis's eyes filled. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. I nodded once. "You didn't know," I said. "You chose what was easiest for you at that moment." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no line ready. I drove back to Indianapolis under a pale sky, thinking about how love can feel like home until you realize you're the only one doing maintenance. That night, I cooked in my new kitchen, simple food, familiar routine. I sat by my window with coffee and listened to the city sounds I didn't yet recognize. I felt lonely, yes, but loneliness is clean compared to disrespect. My friends asked if I was okay. I told them the truth. I'm adjusting. Adjusting is what logistics people do. We rerouted. We adapt. We stopped sending resources to places that waste them. Weeks passed, then months. The urge to check Karis's social media faded. The anger softened into clarity. Occasionally, a memory would hit me. Karis rubbing her thumb over my knuckles in the early days, laughing on the bus, leaning into me at the diner booth. Those memories still hurt, but they didn't confuse me anymore. People can have beautiful moments and still be harmful overall. That's a reality I used to resist because I wanted a clean story. Good girl, bad mother, misunderstanding. The truth was messy, eh? My wife enjoyed the power her mother gave her. The last message Karis sent me was short. No performance, no threats. Just, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply with something poetic and final. Another part of me wanted to ask, why did it take losing everything for you to say this? But I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because my healing didn't need her participation. I'd spent too long trying to get respect through conversation with someone who used conversation to avoid responsibility. Silence was not bitterness now. It was peaceful. People sometimes ask what the karma was like they want fireworks. There weren't any. There was just the slow, cold math of consequences. A business built on image and unstable systems met reality. A marriage built on disrespect lost its foundation. A mother who thought she could put hands on someone without pushback watched her influence end in a quiet, legal room where her voice didn't matter. And me? I didn't win. I reclaimed the ordinary, sleep without tension, work without being mocked, mornings without bracing for the next insult. That is the kind of victory nobody claps for, and it's the only one I trust. I didn't get loud, I didn't beg, and I didn't break anything on my way out. I just stopped carrying people who kept trying to make me kneel. If you made it to the end, you already understand. Karma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's just consequences. Subscribe for more real, grounded stories like this. And watch the next video, because the next one starts where most men finally wake up. The end.